This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to...
This is Nos Arietes.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
Save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is good.
Seattle Sounders, the greatest MLS team in history.
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
And Paul McKay says, cheating.
You want to win? Let's see on a Sunday, bro.
Good for Seattle!
Welcome back to another edition of Nos Arietes, sponsored by Full Pull Wines, Watson's Counter, and our Substack subscribers. This is episode 395, and we're recording on Thursday, May 18th, 2023. I'm your host, Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today is Aaron Campo and our engineer, Lickett. Ugh. For the third time this year, the Sounders faced an opponent riding a winless run of at least 6 games, and for the third time, they managed to lose. This time, it was at home to Austin FC, a team that hadn't won since week 3. The Sounders dominated most of the statistical categories and actually scored their most lopsided XG victory since dominating RSL in week 2, but gave up the opening goal and then another before finally making a game of it on Freddie Montero's goal in the 70th minute. They got a couple very good looks at an equalizer, but ultimately couldn't convert, which was sort of the story of the night. Still, the Sounders are in first place in the Western Conference, second in points per game, and are bossing a bunch of the advanced analytics stats. Yet, it feels like the wheels are coming off after they've scored just 4 goals in their last 6 games. Aaron, where do you fall on this sort of paradigm of it's all screwed up and we need to just put it in the trash, and actually things aren't that bad?
Oh, I'm in the middle, probably slightly towards the things aren't that bad side. I do think this is a really good team. I think they're capable of winning pretty much every trophy they're still playing for. We know they can be much better than this. There's reasons when you look at the underlying data to think that luck is a factor, especially in this game. But it's completely reasonable to be skeptical of all of that when they're losing games like this. And, you know, they did win midweek, and that's great. That was a weird game. And I think anytime, you know, we've said pretty frequently, anytime you can win on the road, especially against a team that has been as good at home as Houston, you have to feel pretty good. But they did have to, you know, play against 9 guys for a decent chunk of the game,
right?
and barely managed to win the game and didn't really look super convincing in doing it. And so it's just, it's one of those moments in time where things don't feel real great. I thought in this game, if this game happens and the Sounders had not just lost to Sporting KC at home, had not just lost to Portland the way they did, and hadn't just been in sort of this period of malaise, I would probably say, well, you know, you're going to lose a game like that every now and again in MLS, where a team that you know you're better than gets a lucky win. And I think it's fair to say that Austin was very lucky in this game. You know, there are games where the underlying data can look misleading because of the game state. Austin went up by 2 goals. And if you hadn't watched the game, I think you could say, well, I'm not buying those numbers because Austin was protecting a 2-goal lead. Of course, they're not going to try to attack. But the Sounders were legitimately creating very, very good chances by both the numbers and the eye test. And they were, whether you think it's luck or whether you think it's just bad finishing, they should have scored more goals, and I think easily could have won that game on another day, but they don't get the benefit of the doubt because they did lose to Sporting KC at home. They did lose to Portland in that fashion. They did just have a game in Houston where they struggled to score against 9 men.
Yeah, and I'll just give a little context. The idea that game state dictates XG there is some truth to that. But I think usually the way that comes to that plays out is that a team attempts a bunch of relatively low probability shots that end up padding their XG numbers just by volume of shots. This was not really the case. The Sounders created probably 5 legitimately good scoring opportunities and only scored on one of them, including an open header at the back post on the game's final play that didn't even really come close to being a goal. But like, I watched that replay 10 times, and yes, the Hebert it looks like he is a little surprised that he gets that clean of a look, but I guarantee that was replaying in his head like all night, because he had an open net and an open look on this shot, and that was sort of like the tail of the night. And like on the other example of that, Hebert played Dylan Tevez in right before the goal that they gave up, the first goal they gave up. Great pass, great run. Tevez makes a pretty good shot on his first touch, tries to go between Stuver's legs, and it just barely gets a piece of his thigh, and it ends up staying out of the net. But it was that kind of night, like there are plenty of nights where the Sounders turn all those chances into 3-4 goals. Like we've seen that happen this year. It's the kind of thing you see happen all the time. Another great example was Alex Roldan plays in a just absolutely perfect cross to Jordan Morris. Jordan Morris makes really good contact on it, happens to hit it basically right at Stuver, who makes the save. That would have been the equalizer actually late in the game. And I think we're feeling a little differently about this one if the Sounders were able to get the equalizer, I think, but they didn't, and they have to sort of live with that. And they've now lost their last 2 home games against bad teams, against teams that were in a really bad place. And we talked about this last week, but I'll say it again. You look at the RSL game and you sort of go, okay, 0-0 tie, probably should have won that game, but I'm not going to lose sleep over it, because at the end of the season, you look at the schedule and you go, yeah, 0-0 tie with RSL. I'll take that. Right. But you do not, there's no circumstances where you look at the Sounders schedule and you say like, oh, you just lost back-to-back games to really bad Sporting Kansas City, and maybe not quite as bad, but pretty bad Austin FC. Those are absolutely games you can't just afford to drop points in, let alone lose. And I don't know if it's going to cost them the supporter shield or if it's going to cost them seeding. I would hope it's not a matter of them making the playoffs or not. I don't think they're going to be fighting for just a playoff spot, but I really do imagine that this will cost them a spot or 2 in the standings.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that's very frustrating, is that they got off to this hot start and they just really haven't taken advantage of it. I think if they were even playing like at a mediocre level right now, if they had gotten 2 points against Sporting KC and Austin, they would have 25 and they would be right there in the Supporter Shield race.
They'd be leading the Supporter Shield, wouldn't they?
No, Cincinnati has 27.
Oh, okay.
If they get a point in one and a win in one, which I think going into those games, I'm pretty sure we had this conversation. We said those are games you should feel like you have to win at home.
Yeah.
If they win both of those games at home, that's 29 points. They are leading the Supporters Shield race. They've got a 7-point edge on LAFC in the Western Conference. LAFC only has 2 games in hand, so they're leading on points per game as well. And that's frustrating. And I think the scary thing is right now it's at a point where you feel like you're blowing your chance to take a pretty commanding lead in the Western Conference and to really stay right in the thick of the Supporter Shield race. If they don't turn this around, you're just completely blowing that hot start. Even if you get the ship righted, in a month or so after Leagues Cup and you're finish well and you're comfortable, that's the difference between finishing first in the West, being in the Supporter Shield race, making the end of the regular season really matter, and going into the playoffs at like third or fourth, being one of the sort of middling teams on the year long, over the course of the full season. And that's not terrible. You can still win the MLS Cup from there. It's not the end of the world, but it does feel like a missed opportunity. And I think when you're a team like the Sounders that has achieved so much in the last 5 to 7, 7 years, I guess, at this point, you want to start pushing the envelope, and you want to say, like, we don't want to have a regular season after regular season after regular season where we're mediocre to good during the year, and then maybe we go on a playoff run. Like, we want to establish ourselves as one of the elite teams in the league. And it's hard to do that when you're losing at home to Sporting KC and Austin FC.
Yeah. And I wrote about this in my column today, but, you sort of expect a lull in any season. And I suppose if this ends up being the worst part of their season and they got 7 points in 6 games, that's a pretty acceptable like lull as far as lulls go. And to their credit, and I think this is maybe one way where this does still feel different than last year, where during this sort of stretch, the Sounders would have probably had more like 2 or 3 points, but instead they've managed to win 2 games. And so they're able to 2 games 1-0, which they didn't look great in. And that's sort of part of the frustration of this, is that they've been managing to get some results during the stretch, but they're just not convincing results. And I was saying, as if this is the lull, that's, you can live with that, but they have to pull out of it, and they have to pull out of it soon. And Vancouver is not a bad team right now. They've struggled in Vancouver, but they are going to Vancouver, not necessarily, I wouldn't say needing a win, but they need a good performance. They need to get a point out of this one at least. And then sort of you start to pick it back up, and you start figuring out, okay, you got a week off, and maybe you can put it back together. But man, this should have been a gravy game. The Dynamo game should have been bonus points, right? Instead, they're needing all of these results that should not be feel like they're must attain results, and they're going to be, they're going to probably be a little shorthanded against Vancouver. I assume a handful of these veterans are going to have to rest. My suspicion is João Paulo is going to probably rest. I would assume one of the center backs. Maybe it would be good to rotate one of the center backs, and that's actually maybe a good segue into this next discussion. What lineup changes, if any, are you hoping to see going into this next game?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably asking too much to hope that Christian is healthy.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
And I do think, as hard as we're being on the team, I do think it's reasonable to acknowledge that they have been missing Christian. They've dealt with, a bevy of other injuries, and
Rui Diaz has been out.
Yep,
a month. Nuhu just came back this last game. He, and that, I don't know. I hope he can start, but man, he looked pretty gassed after playing whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
15 minutes.
It's insane to think that he was capable of even playing 15 minutes after having malaria like 2 weeks ago. It's crazy. I think like anything you get out of Nuhu before the Leagues Cup, you have to kind of consider to be a bonus. But yeah, I mean, that's not to excuse all of this form, right? They're a team that should be beating Sporting Kansas City and Austin
at home.
With the team they have, without any question. But I do think it is reasonable to acknowledge that they've had some tough decisions to make. They've had to try a bunch of different things to try to get this working. I think that for me, and I don't know how popular this opinion is going to be, I would not mind seeing a change at the back. I wouldn't mind seeing Arriaga come in. I think probably for Yeimar. I'm not in the camp of Yeimar is done, which seems to be an emerging perspective within the fan base, but he has definitely recently had a moment or two every game where it's reasonable to expect the opposition to score, and that's not a good thing from your center back. So wouldn't mind giving him a night off, because I just think that can sometimes happen to defenders where they can get into their heads, and he's played a lot this year, so he could probably use a rest anyway. So I wouldn't mind Arriaga coming in. But I'm kind of okay with everything else, right? Like, I thought the attack looked pretty good against Austin. Vancouver is not like a lights out defensive team. I don't think you really have to reinvent the wheel. And, I think for whatever reason, the Sounders have just looked better attacking on the road this year. I think part of that is because they are so good in transition, and it can be tough for them when they're not getting chances in transition. I don't think Vancouver is going to play like a super high press and leave a ton of space, but I do think the Sounders are maybe going to get the opportunity to counter a little bit more. So, if they want to put Jordan at the 9 and put Hebert on the bench, I can certainly understand that. But I do think Hebert has been pretty good at everything but finishing. Obviously, finishing is a pretty critical part of his job, but
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable to expect he's going to start finishing some of those chances. So I'm more or less fine with the team they put out there against Austin. If Nuhu can start, great. That's a huge bonus. But if not, I think running it back actually works, with the caveat of maybe rotating in Arriaga for Yamar.
Yeah, I also wonder, I suspect they have to make some changes, maybe in the midfield as well. Like I'd be a little surprised if João Paulo can go 3 games in a week the way that
Fair.
he would have to go. So I would think maybe Atencio comes in there. I don't know if Ladero looks a little gassed right now to me. I wouldn't mind giving him a day off, and if you're going to do that, maybe you move Albert Rusnak up to the 10 spot. If you move Morris to the 9, I suppose that does leave a little bit of a hole at right mid. I don't know if Tevez. I suppose I feel like Tevez actually looked pretty good. He made some good runs. He looked dangerous in moments. He wasn't great in this game, but I thought he was serviceable. But I wouldn't mind seeing Reed Baker-Whiter potentially get a start either at right back or right mid. Cody Baker, I actually have been very pleasantly surprised with him. I thought he one of the moments that struck me yesterday was he doesn't use his left a ton, but he's usually pretty good. The thing that he's able to compensate with is he's able to sort of like make that switch to his right foot pretty effortlessly. But one of the moments that stuck out to me about Cody Baker was that he really badly mishit this left-footed pass that he tried to take up the sideline, and it went out of bounds, and I'm sure it was a little frustrating for him. But on the next possession, he hit a similar ball really well. And I think that just the fact that he's willing to, that he wasn't so put off that he was like trying to stay off of his left foot for a little while, that he was willing to hit a weighted ball, was a good sign of his confidence and his competence. And so there were, I guess what I'm saying is like, there were definitely some positives. I think there's going to have to be some lineup changes just because I suspect guys need rest. But it's not necessarily changes that I feel like have to be made to send a message. Whereas, in the past, maybe that's why you make those changes. That said, I think the thing that was most glaring to me about that sort of is illustrative of the Sounders' struggles during these last 6 games is they were really, really efficient at using pressure in the opposing third to not necessarily create scoring chances, but to disrupt other offenses and to not really let them get started in the way that like have comfortable build outs. And that just seems to be gone right now. Like they are not turning teams over in their opposing third right now. And I don't know if I don't know what that's about. Like I know in the Sporting Kansas City game, the thing I thought was the problem with that is that you just didn't have Ladero leading the press the way that you want. But that wasn't the case last night. He was leading the press along with Hebert. It just wasn't done well. And I guess maybe that also comes from the midfield pressure not being where it needs to be. I don't know. What did you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that Brian kind of called out in the press conferences. He said we need to press effectively, and definitely seemed to imply that he didn't think they were doing that.
Yeah.
And it was a huge part of why they were so successful early in the season. When teams weren't giving them a lot of space to transition, they were creating transitional opportunities for themselves. And I do think, I mean, all of the goals that stand out to me this year are goals that happen in transition. It's just something that they're really, really good at and they look really comfortable doing. And if they're not getting those opportunities, they aren't finding the creativity to unlock defenses that are sort of packed in against them. I think that was a big part of the reason that breaking down Houston was so difficult. Was Houston really did not have any interest in having the ball at all. So you can't even press them into giveaways, right? So Austin was okay with having the ball, and the Sounders just didn't make them uncomfortable in the way that they were able to do so frequently early in the year. And I don't know if it's just an issue of they need more rotation to be able to effectively do that. There's a lot of guys that have been playing a lot of minutes because the team has been so shorthanded. I don't know if it's not wanting to put maybe some younger, more inexperienced defenders in a position where they're having to, go without having defensive cover because you've got guys pushed so far up and maybe they're trying to make tackles and, get taken out of the play. I'm not really sure what it is. It doesn't look like it looks somewhat intentional to me. But it's just impossible to tell without knowing what the tactical instructions are, right? Whether it's a lack of intensity because they just don't have it in them to do that for 90 minutes anymore, or whether it is an intentional decision for the team to not press as much, or whether it's just a mental thing of the Sounders have given up some really bad goals in transition themselves, and they don't want to give teams the opportunity to do that. Austin definitely had some pretty good chances, in transition early on, and maybe that got into their heads. I don't know, but they're going to have to figure out how to do it effectively again, or they're going to have to change the way they play in the attack, I think, because the way they're playing now, they're just really, despite the fact that they did create some pretty good chances against Austin, they're just really looking pretty toothless in the attack. And if they can't find a way to create those chances through pressure or through finding openings behind the defense in other ways, then they might have to just kind of dramatically change how the team approaches attacking. And I don't think they're really built to do it any other way than they do, right? Like, I just think the personnel they have is really well suited to attacking that way. So yeah, I think they got to figure out how to press effectively again, and whether they do it less frequently but more intensely, or whether they keep it pretty steady but just have different pressing schemes, or whatever it is, they need to start creating those chances again.
All right. Well, that's probably a good place to call this a segment. We're going to come back after the break and break down a little bit more of what we saw, but we'll also talk about, I guess you can call it a big event at the Space Needle today. The Seattle 2026 World Cup Organizing Committee unveiled their logo, but we won't talk too much about the logo, but maybe as well talk about the event. And anyway, we'll be right back. Watson's Counter wants to thank everyone for their patience, but now the wait is over. Located at 6420 24th Avenue Northwest in Ballard, they've reopened in a brand new location with the same bomb-ass coffee and the same dumbass vibes. You can still expect their classics like the gochujang fried chicken sandwich and Fruity Pebbles French toast, alongside their new soft serve program and their world-class coffee. Make sure to follow them on Instagram for all the latest and greatest. Welcome back to Nos Audietes. So I think we've kind of gone through the paces on this last game. But what are some things that you feel like you want to see from the Sounders in this Whitecaps game, even if it's not necessarily result, like outside of the results? What are some of the things you're going to be looking for in this game?
I think continuing to create chances. I think that one of the things that I've noticed as a pattern with teams that are struggling is they'll have a game like this where they don't get the results, but the process is pretty good. They're creating chances. They're doing the right things. They're just coming up unlucky. But the lesson they take from it is, well, that didn't work either. Right. And they try something else. And in this game, I thought that it worked pretty well. I thought the tactical approach was pretty good. They just needed better composure in front of goal and frankly, a little bit more luck. So I'd like to see them trying to do the same things. One of the things that struck me in this game was that a lot of the time when there have been games like this over the years, especially when they're losing by more than one goal and they're playing against a team that's pretty willing to cede possession, is you just see ball into the box, ball into the box, ball into the box. And they weren't doing that this time. They were recycling possession pretty frequently. They were coming with different looks. they were putting constant pressure on them. They weren't giving Austin the opportunity to just clear their lines and reset. And so I'd love to see them continue with that approach. I'd love to see them not come out flat. That's been a little bit of a theme over this run, with the Houston game aside, but that was a freak game, so maybe not even worth dwelling on. I'd like to see them come out, not give up an early goal, ideally not go behind to start would be nice, because I do think that gets in there to the point where that's starting to get into their heads a little bit. We kind of remarked on that earlier in the year where they did give up early goals a couple times and it just was like nothing happened. That hasn't been the case the last 2 times they've conceded. So I'd like to see them avoid that. I'd love to see, like we talked about in the last segment, I'd love to see that press be a little more effective. Might be tough just given the congestion and given the rotation they have to do, but I'd really like to see that make a comeback. And I'd like to see Jordan get a goal because he's such a confidence player.
Yeah.
I think he had a pretty good game, but he does not look the same as he did earlier in the year. We talked about how much swagger he had. We talked about how confident he looked and the results were coming, and that's not there anymore. And so I think it's really important to get him back on track. And I think he's going to have to get a goal or maybe even an assist to get back to that level. And I think he's critical at that level to the Sounders' overall success.
Yeah, it would have been nice for him to get that goal that he put on frame, in part because it was just it was well done. It was a great cross from Roldan. It was a great volley. Again, a little unlucky to be hitting it right at Stuver, but you don't oftentimes get to pick your spot on a volley like that. But in any case, I agree with you pretty much across the board. I think the 2 big things for me are that press, because I just feel like it was such a huge part of their success early on, winning those second balls. It seems silly to get caught up in duels, but there's a good reason that Schmetzer likes that stat, in part because it does show it's sort of like a good effort stat, but it also, the duels are oftentimes what's creating those turnovers in the opposing end, and it just makes life so much easier when you're frazzling the opposing offense before they're even really able to set up. And against the Whitecaps, whose underlying numbers are actually really good, they haven't turned that into as many. They're actually one of the only teams that's underperforming XG more than the Sounders are. But it would be nice if they could continue that. And the Whitecaps have been pretty good, so we'll see. It does not feel like a hopeless situation for them. Heck, I might even want to see Freddie Montero in this game. I don't necessarily love him starting, but he has looked good. And I really would love to feel like we can just bring him off the bench consistently, because he does really seem to be coming into this role really effectively, where he is just doing his bit. He's not, you're not relying on him to be 90 minutes or even 60 minutes. If you can get 30 minutes out of Freddie Montero, you're looking pretty good. And the goal he had was a great goal. I mean, it was a great goal.
It was a great goal. Yeah. Freddie, to me, when he knows he only has to go 20, 30 minutes, looks like vintage Freddie. I think it's when he starts and he knows he has to conserve energy, that step that he's lost, that needing to protect himself a little bit more, from bumps and stuff like that. That's when he's much more limited. When he can go full effort, he looks great.
No, I totally agree. So yeah, I guess I don't want to see Freddie starting in this game, but I would not mind seeing him play, because like I said, he's still a fun player to watch, even all that aside. A somewhat related note, this is more of a pet peeve, and I hate to do this. I feel like we've gotten better about just sort of like taking shots at random people who are commenting on our site and whatnot. But man, it drove me a little crazy today, seeing how many people saying the Sounders are just boring to watch right now. And I definitely understand where that's coming from. It's frustration with results. And there's some truth to that in some of these previous games. But last night, man, if you weren't entertained from a neutral perspective, I don't really know what to tell you. Like the game was up and down. It wasn't necessarily pretty, but it was was action, there were chances, there were a lot going on, and I think it sometimes just drives me crazy when people what I think people are frustrated with is the results not going their way, and that's fair.
Yeah.
That's totally fair to
Yeah.
be like, I want to win games, and I don't like not winning
Yeah.
games. That's a fair position, and I think it's totally like legit to just admit that you aren't being entertained because the Sounders aren't winning as much as you'd like. That's okay.
Yeah, I don't think that fun and boring are necessarily antonyms, right? Like, it's not
Right.
fun, but that game specifically was not boring,
Exactly.
and the Sounders were entertaining to watch. And if XG were real G, it would have been great.
Yes. Yeah, if they'd won that game 3-2, I think we would be running around being like, yeah, that's fine. You got to win a shootout every now and then. And they created plenty of chances to win 3-2. I think that's what the killer is. Like in a lot of ways, this was their best perform. Like, yeah, I would say offensively, it was probably their best performance since the RSL game. And that's saying something. They had a couple pretty good games in the meantime. And I don't know. It was a shame that it went the way it did. And I think they have to answer some tough questions, and they've made their bed. And now they got to dig out of this little hole that they've dug themselves, and they got to start getting back to it. That said, if they beat Vancouver, you sort of like hit the reset button, I suppose. You're never really going to get those results back that you just dropped, but you can make some headway. All right, well, we may as well transition. I don't have a good way of transitioning this, but there was a kind of a fun event on Thursday where the Seattle 26 World Cup organizing committee had the unveiling of their logo, which is just a sort of their version of the World Cup logo, which I imagine you agree sucks, right? It's really
bad. Yeah, it is extremely American, and I don't mean that as a compliment.
If you haven't seen it, I guess I would urge you to go to your nearest computer and just Google World Cup 2026 logo. But it's essentially just a photograph of the trophy behind a very weird font 26. And that's it.
Yeah.
And I guess the idea that they are pitching is, well, each organizing committee has plenty of room to make this their own. And I mean, okay, sure. But like, you could still give him a better canvas. There's a lot of ways to do that without me giving him such a shitty canvas. And to their credit, the Seattle organizing committee picked a bunch of really, I think, attractive colors. There are like 5 of them though, and I don't know that they really ever are coherently like used together. Like it's I don't know. Have you seen this, Aaron? Have you had a chance to look at it?
Kind of a little bit. I definitely saw the flags, and I saw that the scarves not only didn't like adhere to the same color scheme, but actively clashed with the on very non-complementary sides of the I wheel, unfortunately. There.
Like I like each of the colors individually, and I even think some of them could work together.
Sure.
But like I said, there's 5 colors. I'll see. I'll find the literature that they gave us on this, and it's
sort of a like muddy rave green, a more vibrant rave green almost, or like halfway between rave green and electricity yellow. A nice like mid 90s Sonics green, and a UW purple, I guess.
Yeah, and then so the one of the things I thought was interesting is they call this like a golden brown, I think is what they called it, and it's supposed to like be evocative of coffee. And I was talking to Jada Evans about this, and she was really struggling with this idea because it does not look like coffee. And then she realized like, oh, maybe it's the raw coffee bean, and I could see that. But of course, that's also not the way that they pitched it.
Also, most people don't know what a raw coffee bean looks like.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's the other problem with it. But like I said, I do like these colors individually, and I think some of them sort of work together. But I don't know. It feels like a bit of a mess. there were. I'll add that we did get to talk to a few of the officials that are involved in this thing, and they did repeat that they're putting in permanent grass. That was never really a question, but it's always good to hear it, and that and they seem to there does seem to be this constant drumbeat of it's going to be permanent grass. We're not going to just put it in for the World Cup. It's going to be there for at least the whole year. And at least my selfish hope is that it goes so well that the Seahawks fall in love with it and like, no, we got to keep this stuff. This is so much better.
Yeah. Or the NFLPA.
Or the NFLPA. Yeah, exactly.
Forces the hand. Yeah.
We didn't get a lot else other than they have big plans for the Fan Fest. This is stuff we knew. They are really committed to making this about the people of the Puget Sound and Washington and yada, yada, yada. These are great things to say. We still don't know how any of that is going to come to fruition. I did ask, there's presumably going to be some people displaced by this or adversely affected, and they are saying all the right stuff about how, well, our goal is to make sure no one is adversely affected. We'll see how that goes. But these are things that I do think we have to keep an eye on to some degree. It's not going to be all rainbows and unicorns. Like for just, normal people living here, there's going to be some negative impacts, let alone people that are underserved already, who are vulnerable in a variety of ways. And these are things that are worth, I think, keeping in mind and hoping and hope. I do think all these people seem like good people, and I know their hearts are in the right place. I just hope that they're able to actually fulfill a lot of these high-minded ideals that they've pitched.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think that the problem is never, well, I won't say never, but I think in things like this, it's a road to hell is paved with good intentions kind of thing, where it becomes this just like unstoppable monster that crushes people. And that's nobody's goal necessarily. It's just sort of inherent to the whole process, unless you are very, very, very actively trying to prevent that from happening. And I don't think FIFA really cares. I mean, that's about that
right,
happening.
Exactly. And that's sort of the thing, is that unless your local organizing community really cares, that's the only way any of this is going to get done. And all you have to do is look at Qatar, and Qatar definitely didn't care, and they did whatever they wanted, and FIFA was effectively just a passenger on this thing. And if we don't want that to happen here, we have to be diligent about asking these questions and hoping these things come through. I will say that I think the waterfront is going to be really nice. I hope that it is nice in a way that makes it feel useful to residents of the city and not just to tourists. But I think there's some potential there, not to get all urbanist, but Western Avenue just opened, and that is effectively turned into a freeway. I was actually just talking to someone that lives down in Belltown, and they were saying how it used to be pretty pleasant before this thing was open, and now you have cars flying by, and it's all of a sudden a very busy road. And they said they wanted to make it more, pedestrian and bike friendly, but yet there's no real infrastructure to stop cars from driving 40 miles an hour through a city street. And it's like, if you really care, you got it. These are the little details that end up making or breaking these sorts of projects. Right. And we haven't had a great track record of nailing these things yet. There was a lot of hope that our light rail system was going to be pretty much built out by 2026. There are a lot of reasons to doubt that's going to happen. Not necessarily anyone's, like, again, best intentions, but like there's been all sorts of problems that, hopefully we have a light rail system that does connect all the way to the east side, because we're probably going to need all that hotel space, and we're going to need ways to move lots and lots of people without them all driving into downtown Seattle.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's not like we can add like a lot of freeways, or should be doing
parking.
that even if we could.
Like we can't, like it just physically, we literally can't. There's just nowhere to put any of this stuff. Like whether or not we think people should be driving in or not, it's sort of irrelevant. We need to have transportation options for people, and if we don't have light rail, running to the east side, that's going to create, like, you can only run so many buses.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is that if you are going to have these events that are horribly disruptive just by their very nature for the time that they're going on and the time before and after for, a few weeks or months on either side, but then also have like lasting consequences or social costs, you should at least get some kind of lasting social benefit out of it, rather than whatever theoretical money goes into the pockets of people that own the hotels that live 3,000 miles away or whatever. Like, and so if you don't get that, I think you have to consider it objectively to be like a net loss for the city if you don't get these lasting benefits. And
that is, and to their credit, that's one of the things that they're talking about. They want to leave legacy. They want to have presumably legacy infrastructure as well. And hopefully, again, I bring this up just to say we got to hold them accountable to making sure this stuff actually happens, because there's a lot of potential for it to not happen, and it's very easy to just push that stuff aside in the name of making sure that this goes off how you wanted it to go off. But like,
yeah, and it has to be stuff that's beneficial to people who do not care about the World Cup. I think that's the thing that always gets lost, is that people say, well, we had this great event and like it raised the city's profile. Most of the people who live in Seattle don't care about that stuff at all. But they should get some kind of benefit out of it because they're going to be disrupted by it.
I'll say this is, I'm really excited about the World Cup coming here. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I don't want to, yuck anyone's yum as far as that goes, but it just has to be more than just a sporting event. It's not going to, it's not just going to be here for a couple of days and then it's going to leave and that's it. It's a huge, there's like 4 years of build up. There's 4 years of investment. And then there is going to be like a month long of real impact that's going on here, and it's up to us, up to you, the listeners, up to everyone involved in this to make sure that these things do happen, and it'll be really interesting to see. But I guess I don't really have much else. I have been hearing. I'll just throw this out there. I don't have a lot to give you, but somewhat related to the World Cup, I guess, is I don't know if it's really related. Though, as you've probably heard, the Reign are effectively for sale right now. John Texter, the guy who bought Olympic Lyon, apparently based his valuation on Lyon making Champions League every year, and in year one they're not going to make it. And they probably aren't going to make it every year, but he's having to sell off a bunch of assets. And right now it looks like most of those assets are going to be the women's soccer parts of the organization. And shocking how that works.
Like one of the most successful. It's just depressing, dude. These, not to go off on another SJWS rant here, but like people getting involved in sports as purely investment vehicles that know shit about dick, and just it's always the underserved elements of whatever they were, like community outreach, the women's club, all of it is what goes first. It's so infuriating.
Yeah, exactly. But so they're for sale, and best I can gather, there are a couple groups in the Seattle area that are interested in potentially buying them. I don't really have much more to add to it other than I'll let people speculate what those might be. But it could be an interesting, could be a net positive. It could be a net positive potentially, depending on who gets this and what that ends up meaning. But it adds, I think it would be great if it adds fuel to, and if somehow it helps pave the way for a better experience at Lumen Field, that would be great. Or who knows, maybe even it turns into something at Memorial Stadium, which I'm a little skeptical. It seems like the Reign aren't super enthused about going to Memorial unless it's like a 20,000 seat stadium. And in that case, that probably changes the conversation. But, we'll see. Yep. It could be interesting times in the world of soccer. I'll also add that I have been asking about the Long Acres project, and there was a report in the in a Renton the Renton Reporter, which I think is a newspaper. Maybe it's just a website, but it sort of it seemed to hint at there being some holdups there, and I guess things are progressing as they're on schedule apparently at Long Acres, and they're going to even be putting in the grass, like laying the grass down pretty soon. And I'm supposed to be able to go check that out, and I'll happily report back. I'm going to hopefully do a sit down with Hugh Weber, the new president of the Sounders, ideally around the same time. And yeah, we'll see. It could be interesting times in Seattle soccer, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Well, I hope so, because the on the field product maybe not as much lately. So.
How dare you?
I know. Well, one game aside,
right,
I
exactly. Well, hopefully we have a more fun show to do next week. All that said, thank you to our Substack subscribers. I just want to give everyone a plug. If you are a fan of this podcast and you like reading things that I write, I would urge you to go to nosaudiatis.substack.com and become a paid subscriber. And it encourages us and keeps us doing these kinds of things. It supports local soccer media, and it'll make you feel good about actually, paying for a service that you use, I suppose. But other than that, thank you to Watson's Counter, who, of course, just opened their new restaurant. It's pretty awesome. I happened to go there with Lickett last week, had a nice brunch. They have wonderful coffee. They are serving soft serve, ice cream. It's a fun experience. And of course, our longtime supporters at Football Wines. Hopefully people are still loving all these people that work with us. So anyway, signing off for Aaron Campo and Lickett, I am Jeremiah Oshan. This is Nos Audietis. Remember, you will never yet alone.
We love you. Let's win another one.